Each month in 2020, at our AgilePDX Puppet events, we have taken one of the 12 Agile Principles and explored what they mean for our work today, inside and outside of software. In October, we explored the 10th Agile Principle. Simplicity, the art of maximizing the amount of work not done, is essential. Our session host, John Englund, did an excellent job explaining this principle and led a vibrant discussion. Take it away, John.
A few pictures I thought were kind of fun to look at. I remember when my uncle told my my dad about Google, and he wanted us to stay hush hush about it because we didn't want it to get overridden because it was such a valuable search engine that don't tell anybody about it, but this is really good. And unfortunately, I guess the word spread. But look at one of the things that was most impressive and still is impressive about Google is their homepage. I know they've added some stuff at the bottom now. You can have like quick links, but just Google has other app. Like if you compare this to the Yahoo page, which is like busy and horrible. It has if you go up to the top right, it has for mail, it has your calendar, it has some alerts, which also is available in Google, but it's very simple. What you're supposed to do with Google is search for something, and that's it. Is this speaking to anybody?
What I really love about that, the distinction that you made, is that with this simplicity, then it gives us room as a user to decide what we really want or what we really need. Whereas with Yahoo, I feel like it's being shoved in my face and I can't choose for myself what I really need.
Yeah. Have you guys what's that movie that just came out about social media? And there's basically all they're trying to do is to keep you inside and keep you clicking or whatever. This just feels like it's just trying to track something where it's like I look at it, just get overwhelmed immediately, where this is like, all right, I need to search for something.
Mm-hmm.
So my main, the app that's used by most of our users looks like very similar to this page here. And we constantly get pressure from marketing and other people. Let's throw this onto this page, or let's throw that. And I'm constantly pushing against it because I really like this idea. Just keep it simple.
Yeah. It's hard. It's got to be hard because if you're Google, why don't you have mail, calendar, all that other stuff here? I don't know why not. Like I could see a good argument for it, but somehow they've kept it just Google. That's it. Yeah, it'd be tough conversations to have.
John, I'm reminded of a Steve Jobs quote where he says, edit to amplify. And I think that's what Google's done really well. It's like they've just focused, what they're good at, and they provided that to the end user.
Yeah.
Well, they've focused on their one core operation, which is providing a search. And they've become known as search in the same way that Kleenex is known as the facial tissue company.
Yeah.
We never refer to facial tissues by that name anymore. It's always Kleenex.
Yeah.
So
maybe you reached on something. Maybe this is what the core functionality is. This is what they're truly offering. They offer other services, but this is the core functionality that you came here for. That's interesting.
Focus
okay, here's
provides,
some more. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say focus provides attention in the place that you want people to be.
Yeah. How many times have you gone to? How many times did you go to this page right here, and then all of a sudden you realize, why the heck did I even go to Yahoo? I was going there to search for something, and now I'm looking up. I don't even know what the admiral oversees the Bin Laden raid. It's like all of a sudden you're going to these wormholes. It's like you don't even know why you came there. Okay.
But the most thing on Bing, John, is google.com.
I'm out of here. Yeah, I like that. Okay, here's a good one. There's a product design. Have like 1,000 options that probably do the exact same thing. It's probably just a gimmick, or we can just push blend.
Yeah. That's awesome.
I don't know how many of you guys are cyclists. but when I was a kid and growing up, they came out with the 27 speed, or that was just like for mountain bikes anyway. They started making these 27 speed mountain bikes. So in the front you have 3 rings, in the back you have 9 rings. So 3 times 9 is 27. And that was like, like then you have 2 shifters up front. You have the front derailleur and the rear derailleur, and you just have just the ultimate pressure that you need to put on those pedals to every choice in the world is how hard or easy you want to pedal. And starting about I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago, they started decreasing the number of rings up front. So they started putting around the 3rd ring, because no one ever really used it for mountain biking. They changed it to a bash guard. So you just a hard ring that you could run into a log and you're not going to break any little sprockets off. And on road bikes, they changed it to 2 rings up front. And then about 4 or 5 years ago, they changed for mountain biking just 1 small ring up front, and then 11 or 12 rings in the back. And what this did is it made it so you didn't have a front derailleur, because a front derailleur is another thing to adjust. It's another thing that with your hands to have to hit to go to an easier gear. It makes it so your chain would drop all the time if you hit your front derailleur and you have to go around a tight turn. And now with just with your right hand, you can click and go all the gears you really need. Like the 27 is just not totally necessary. And so it really simplified the bike and made it a lot more functional, and took a lot of the air out of the derailleurs, and left your left hand for doing other things like hold your handlebars, or they have like different seat drop posts up front that is adjusted by the left hand. And so a product design that really made it a lot simpler, and took a lot of the unnecessary gears out. Did those speak to anybody? Anybody with work and something that's done maybe in product design or in the tip of web development or coding?
I think not just making things simpler, it is moving complexity, because that rear wheel is now much more complicated than it used to be.
Yeah.
Simplifying the hand controls is worth it.
Yeah.
The problem with the design like this, there are people that actually would prefer to have both left and right, the front and back, both adjustable. But it's not necessary to make everybody absolutely happy. The people that are saying that they would like the left and right, if they actually try this design and try it out, they'd probably be very, very satisfied. Like maybe more satisfied than what they think they want.
Yeah.
Example.
Yeah, they probably look at it and say like, oh no, I need the bigger ring because this doesn't have enough range. But if they haven't tried it, they don't actually know. And so maybe the difficulty is getting them to try it. I was trying to see, maybe I stole your train of thought there.
No, I don't. A lot of times it's not getting them to try it. It's just knowing when not to listen to them, which sounds kind of arrogant. I'm sorry. But an example is I was on a very complicated product at a company in the area called Tektronix. And the product was pretty much done when we got this feedback from a very important customer that she would like to change the color of the font, which seems trivial, but back then this was really complicated. It was not in the design. It took a good two months to put that new feature in. And nobody in the entire life of the product ever used it. There are times when to simplify, you kind of need to know to ignore something.
Yeah, I actually had a conversation with the person today. Is how do you, when you're playing the role of a product owner, when a customer comes to you with a solution that they have, and it's not necessarily a good solution or not even really a solution to the problem that they have, what do you do? And yeah, that can be complicated. It's like, I want to do this. Like, well, let's actually figure out what the root cause of your problem is, and then go from there. But yeah, when customers are asking for something, how do you tell them, no, or that's not a good idea, or actually this is going to be better? That can be tough.
Sounds like a discussion of cost versus benefits, right? Like really how much are you going to have to give up to make that happen? And is it worth it?
Absolutely. Okay, that's the end of my pictures. So all the visual learners can now tune out. So I have a few slides here just talking about some discussion on common pitfalls, and we'll start there. So when talk about simplification, some things that came up, documentation for the sake of documentation. I'm not sure how many of you guys, we at Nike, we did Confluence, and documenting in coding was very important because contractors would cycle through and they want to have the right documentation on why you made certain decisions, and that was valuable. But there's also that can go too far where you're just documenting everything and like just gets crazy, and it's hard to find anything because it's just a pile of just a big mess of documentation. So I think it's like everything, there's a sweet spot in how much to do. But anybody have any thoughts on documentation, or have any situations where it went well, where it was too much, too little?
I think that's one of the areas where in working with teams, help guide them around self-documenting code. So rather than having all kinds of documentation that you write up and publish, or even comments within the code, how do you structure your methods? How do you structure your variables and such that they're self-describing, self-documenting, so that it makes sense and you can almost read it like a book and understand what it's doing? Then you don't need to have all this extraneous documentation.
And do you have other developers read it or review it to see, like, to give feedback to, hey, can you actually expand here, or how do you make it so it's
oh, absolutely,
accepted by the team?
Peer review is critical.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. More is not better. That maybe goes back to that Yahoo example. Just adding more and more features is not necessarily a better product. I think it's one of the that speaks to this principle. And then
hey John.
And then something. Go ahead.
John, I want to go back to what Michael was talking about at the beginning, Michael, you were talking about how the marketing team really wants to add more to your app or whatever that front page is. Can you speak to that a little bit more? Like, what is this thrust from the marketing team? Why are they trying to influence it in that way?
It's because they're going out in the field and they're talking to current or potential customers. And when they talk to someone, that customer may say, well, look, your competitor has this other thing, and I like that. Or sometimes marketing, when they talk to a customer just feels the need to express that they are contributing in some way to the idea of the design. And they actually will come up with something that's not necessarily that they've given a lot of thought to. Marketing knows if they make the customer happy, they're more likely to buy the product. And that's why marketing constantly wants to put more in.
So they want to appear to be more responsive to the customer.
Yes, yeah. Which obviously is good. It's important, right? But you have to look at the long-term maintainability of the product, and as well as making the overall customer base happy, not just one particular person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's where it's important to ask the question, how do you know what true value is to the customer? How do you understand when something is just a nice to have versus something that's actually solving a problem? And how do you measure that and get real telemetry and metrics around it?
Yeah.
All right. The last one I had on here, meetings. One of the things that I did when I first came in, we had these the backlog refinement, and then sprint review, and then sprint planning, and it felt like we were spending a lot of time in the meetings with talking to one or two people at a time. So we have I think 6 or 7 developers, and each one of them would be, 1 or 2 of them would be talking about each story, and the rest of them would be sitting there most of the time. And I felt like we could be more efficient. So what we started to do for backlog refinement, we had the Scrum Master with the product owner, the tech lead, and the lead business analyst would be required to attend. And then we had everybody else, all the other developers on the team, block their calendar out. And if we needed them, they needed to come help us out. But we got to the point where we could get through most of the stories. We'd probably need their help, maybe one or two people to come into the meeting for a minute or so. And we could get the backlog refined enough to where we'd have the stories for the next sprint. And then during sprint planning, we would refine the stories a bit more depending on the sprint. Just depends how complicated things were, that we get the developers' feedback, because that was critical. But we went from having for backlog refinement, that was 2 hours, and then sprint planning was 4 hours. And it took the full 4 hours. But then we would we had backlog refinement would take normally an hour to two, sometimes either the whole time. And then sprint planning went down to 1 to 2 hours. And it really helped out a lot. I wasn't really following the safe, agile, strict code on the hours that we're supposed to spend, but it made things a lot better. And the development team appreciated a lot, because no one likes to go to a meeting just to sit there. Feedback on that, or feedback on ways you guys have gotten to reduce the amount of time you're having yourself in meetings, or having protecting your developers from meetings, or other general wasted time?
Yeah, I think it's one of the places where when you find somebody who's got stand-ups that are going longer than 15 minutes, it's usually because there are one-off conversations going on in that stand-up that really deserve to be separate meetings with 2 or 3 people.
Yeah.
And not involve everybody, not subject everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, I wasn't strict to keeping the times. We went shorter, but definitely I was very adamant about, stand-up's 15 minutes and no longer. And you shouldn't, even if you get close to 15 minutes, you're probably spending too much time on one specific subject, or have too many people on your team or in the meeting.
I found
anybody else? Go ahead.
Yeah, I found working as an Agile coach and a Agile transformation agent that many times I'll see organizations when they're trying to implement whatever methodology, SAFe, Scrum, any of them, and they end up taking the ceremonies defined in whatever method they're using and apply them in an additive fashion. So they tend to not replace any of the existing meetings and ceremonies that they have, and just add on all of these other meetings. And so now they're complaining that, oh, this is so overburdensome. I thought Agile was supposed to be, less, but here we have more. Well, because you haven't gone through and rationalized and said, we don't need all this other stuff anymore. Let's consolidate and pare it down. So
yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. That's funny when they adopt certain portions of it. It's funny when they still have, I'll see job postings, it'll be Agile Scrum Master / Project Manager. And it's that's 2 different things. I'm not sure you're quite wording that correctly, because that's 2 different things. Yeah. Or at Nike, we would report into project management, on our status and stuff. And I'm this is not really quite flowing the way you're supposed to flow.
Yeah.
Okay, I thought a few questions to ask when reviewing a story. This probably be something that you would start to do to try to create a culture of simplification. But could be a thing that you think about when you review team rules at the end of a retrospective. This could be something that you review at the beginning of a backlog refinement. Say, hey, this is what we want to think about, or maybe say for each story. Or you get your own if you like to, but I think these things could help create that culture of we want to make things simple, straightforward, and really utilize this principle. So are we adding value by doing this? Or what value are we adding? Is it something that is attached to our mission? As you know, that was really interesting comment when you're comparing like that marketing department bugging you about stuff and Google, like how strict they would have to be about, no, we're not touching this homepage. This is what the homepage looks like. There's no other anything on it. And value can be a relative term, of course, and depending on their interpretation of it. Could we make this simpler? Could we make it, that's just a simple question we can ask. Or what would happen if we didn't do this story? I think that probably a lot of tech debt could be put into there. But yeah, I think these are really valuable questions. Any questions you guys want to add to this, tweak this, to make sure you're really making things simpler, or challenging your team to make things simpler?
John, I think one component that I challenged the team with is, you know, how many users were impacted by us doing or completing this story. Like, we might have added value for just one user, but man, was that really worth it, worth our time? So it's like, okay, can we say how many users times the value? You know, really, how broad was our impact by doing this body of work?
That'd be really cool, especially it takes some emotion out of the decision-making process when you're refining the backlog. It takes the emotion out of, like, well, this actually didn't meet our backlog criteria to get into a story because it didn't. Like, I'm glad that you wanted the color to change or you wanted this to happen, but there's not enough impact to this doesn't. Yeah, it's not enough impact to require the story to happen.
How are you going to measure the value that you're adding? How do you know you're actually adding value?
Yeah, Ron said that the number of users that be impacted, but you can impact all the users by changing like the login screen, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're making it better. That's a good point too. That could help in making the justification up for a story. Like how would you make them prove why the customer wants it and provide real justification for it and show the value that they're really adding to make it worth it. I like that. Anyone else? Other questions that you guys ask for stories or would have with a customer who's asking you to make a change? Okay.
Is there already another way to accomplish the same thing?
Yeah. What are you actually trying to accomplish? I think that's what's the user trying to achieve, which is a really critical thing, because developers can come back with 3 or 4 or 5 different ways to deliver that, including ones that sometimes don't deliver on the do part. They just deliver on the outcome part.
Yeah.
And sometimes those are good enough.
I'm going to add that to this right here. Actually, hold on. I think this is valuable. So what is the user trying to achieve, or a customer trying to achieve? But a customer trying to achieve, or what is the story trying to achieve? And then is there already a solution?
I think that fourth question gets to does everyone on the team understand what we're trying to achieve with this story?
I think that really would help actually refine the story too. That would really help. Just like, all right, I don't totally get what they're trying to achieve, and what you think they're trying to achieve is something different. And if you understood that, then you would possibly, another developer say, hey, well, why don't we do it this way? Or there's already a solution for that over here, instead of just blindly taking the stories and just doing them.
Yeah.
Because the customer doesn't necessarily understand or know what they totally want, or they may not understand what the solution that they're trying to get to.
Yeah, the customer may try to supply us with a solution that they think is going to give them what they want, but they haven't actually told us what they want, what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
What they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. Great. Good discussion. Okay. Other tips that I put into here. So during a meeting, so like I've done this at Providence. They have meeting assignments. Doesn't always happen, but you have someone who's like a mission advocate. Someone to basically check their team if they're in the discussion, are they really going to the mission. They have a timekeeper, They'll have a scribe, and I was thinking have someone who's assigned to be like the simplified police. To like, hey, it's your job this backlog refinement to keep us in check to make sure we're following those few rules that we just came up with, and are we overcomplicating things, and to push back and have that as a specific assignment. Because some people, I found that assigning people in meetings to those kind of things helps someone who is not necessarily vocal. They feel awkward about it, like especially a timekeeper. You don't want to be the person who's always like, hey, well, we're past agenda time, or hey, we're getting close to time. But if you're assigned that as a job, it's easier to say it, and it's more like, I don't know, it's more likely to happen to stay on target, and people are more likely to speak up. It's not so awkward for that person or for other people. And so if you have a simplified police person, it's just like, it may make the team more likely to do it because that's their job for that specific meeting, and it can rotate. Reduce the number of interruptions as much as possible. I feel like that's a real job of a Scrum Master, to organize the time of the developers, to make sure that people coming in to talk to them or ask questions, it needs to be filtered through so they're not getting taken away. I feel like there's a big loss in time. It's an agile part of being agile. It's just making them focus on less interruptions and keeping the stories as simple as possible so they can get done with it and move on to the next one without interruptions. And I feel like that has to do with simplification as well. And then refine stories before you meet with developers. I talked about that a little bit earlier. Get them down to a level to where you can speak to it as a product owner, as a Scrum Master, or a tech lead even, so that the developers can help refine it, but it's not so vague that they have to ask a lot of questions. So it's funny to be in a position as a Scrum Master when it feels like everybody else's time is valuable and mine isn't. But I don't know. I feel like that's the way I could be the servant leader, is like, I'll take the time on, I'll take this on as much as I can, so and respect them as much as possible. Thoughts on those or other tips that you guys have?
I think that last one is a good one, where Kanban really helps with the flow, and having proper entrance criteria for any story before you bring it into the column where it's prepared for reviewing with the team and having that team discussion. Do you have the proper entrance criteria? Have you gone through and defined with the team what is that criteria of what needs to be met before we actually bring this to you, to make sure that we're not wasting anyone's time?
Yeah, so having entrance criteria into the backlog even. Mm-hmm. Or yeah, I like the entrance. You can't just write a story. There's a lot of just like placeholder type stories, which I never really liked. And it's like, let's not even clog up the backlog unless you've met some certain criteria. I like that. I don't know how to spell. I can't even see this. Criteria, whatever. I can't. It's so small. Okay. Anybody else? Crittery.
Oh, I'm going to be contrarian about clogging up the backlog. So I'm not a fan of clogging up the backlog, but I think that so back in my waterfall days, how many waterfall days people do we have here? Yeah, a bunch. So back in our waterfall days, the product managers had to write up an entire spec. And so how many people got 100 pages or more requirements or wrote those? Yeah, so a ton. And there's real value to understanding what a product or what a project is, but there's not real value to having all those details, because none of us ever read those. Or if we read them, we didn't, by the time we got to the end, we didn't remember what was at the beginning, or we slogged through and oh, by the way, I've asked a ton of developers what percentage of those of you who did waterfall and got 100+ pages, what percentage of those did you actually deliver? Any guesses for the percentages I got?
What percentage was delivered, or what percentage was actually used?
What percentage was delivered? What percentage did we actually put into production or put into onto CDs or you know, onto the mainframe, or depending on where we were putting it. But what percentage of 100+ pages of requirements actually got done?
My guess
35 pages.
10%. 10%.
What did you say, Star?
10%.
10%? Yeah, the ranges the typical ranges were from 10 to 45%. And then I occasionally got a 5%. And then occasionally there's like a NASA engineer who says 90-some%. Turns out when you send people into outer space, you want to get them back. but the typical project is really low. And what that means is that you know, even if it's 45%, that means that 55% of the work the product manager did was waste. And that 55% of what testers did in writing test plans was waste, because they wrote test plans for the whole thing. The developers tried to read the whole thing and got their brains glommed up, basically. Architects tried to create architecture that would support the whole thing, which was over architecture. At the same time, I like hearing those features. I like having the feature names on my backlog, and I like that because it gives us all as a team a picture of what that project is or what that product is in the mind of the product manager right now. And the waste is if they actually do anything more than that, because really the only the top 3 sprints worth of stories need anything more than that. The top 3 sprints worth of stories need all of the detail, every bit of the detail that we needed in that 100 pages of requirements and more, because the 100 pages of requirements weren't adequate. They had ambiguities in them. But only the top 3 sprints worth, because I don't know about you, but so anybody work in startups? Not seeing any hands, a lot of enter, so, and I'm not seeing everybody. But people in startups find that founders tend to ideate at a rate of about an order of magnitude faster than we can develop, and they keep getting fed into that backlog. And in enterprise work, the same thing is true. It's just not quite as fast. And so some of that stuff is going to be more important than anything that's at the bottom of the backlog. So Neil, I'm totally with you in not wanting, or John actually, in not wanting to clog up the backlog, but. And I think having a refrigerator to throw stuff off the bottom of the backlog into is valuable.
Yeah, I think there's some balance there. So I usually differentiate between the funnel and the backlog. Funnel being fair game for just about anything to come in. You know, that's where things can build up, and things may sit there for quite some time. But the backlog that the team actually works from and pulls from, you know, the level of criteria that it needs to enter there, so it's not wasting the time of the team, but they still have visibility to the funnel. But even again, once your funnel gets so large, there comes a point in time where if it's that important, somebody will bring it up again. So, you know, purging occasionally the stuff that's sat there for a period of time, let that drop away. If it's that important, it'll come back.
My rule of thumb is that there's no point in adding things to the backlog faster than the team can take it off. If your backlog is growing, you're not providing real value. Some forgiveness at the start of a project, but for most of it, it's pretty constant.
Unless you've got a startup founder.
Yeah.
because that's how you deal with them. Oh, what a great idea. Let me put that on my backlog.
Yeah, it's like a parking lot instead of a meeting.
That's one way you weed out their really good ideas from just their fleeting, you know, thoughts. If it was really that good of an idea, they're going to bring it back again, and they'll bring it back again. And pretty soon you see a trend that, okay, this one needs to stick around.
Yeah,
I like the funnel backlog thing.
Yeah, I like the balance is definitely with all, you know, they call us the art of doing this, and so there's definitely an art to it, and it has to work in the organization that you're at. I think I was specifically talking about the backlogs. We had this kind of practice where we would have all these stories that would come to every single quarter, in PI planning. We put them in there, and then they would always get like this certain group would always get pushed out to the next one. And it was like, this is just like, if we're gonna do this, let's do this. If not, let's not. And we could never delete anything from the backlog because someone once requested it. It's like, let's just clean this thing up and have it available for storage for the future and features we want to do down the road. But you don't want to have it just as like a trash bin where you just put all the storage you're not going to do. Okay,
Hey,
well,
Tom.
that's, yeah.
Just another tip that I have, and really my experience comes from B2B with as in the product management space. So it was a little bit easier to do, but once a quarter, I would reach out to my customers and say, hey, you can do a little mini retrospective, and I'd share the feedback with the team. Hey, what did we do well? What do we need to improve on? Or like, what's the functionality that you're currently using? Because that was a good bellwether for us being like, man, we spent so much time delivering this and they're not even using it. Like, what's going on? And so that really helped develop a better muscle in terms of like, maybe we don't need to go into this depth. Maybe we need to have better relationships with our customers to understand what they truly need instead of like getting all this complexity into the tool. And so it was just something that we had to rinse and repeat every quarter, but it seemed like we got better and better in terms of asking those questions. So we were actually really, truly delivering that business value back to the customer.
That's great. That's a real centric. Yeah, it's customer centric. I like that a lot. Yeah, I like that. Anybody else have any other tips and tricks that have worked for them or stuff that spoke to you during this session?
I worry about overcomplicating story descriptions. And working with where the customer kept putting more and more into their story before the team even sees it, which caused us to spend even more time ripping it apart and planning. Where they're making lots of decisions they didn't need to make, making without considering other aspects of the system. The team could have handled all that stuff during the iteration. It's just part of working on the story.
Yeah, I found that like when you're writing a story, if it's too complicated, trying to break it down. Like we didn't like 5-point stories. We liked 1, 2, and 3-point stories, and because the 5 ones could often bleed over the next sprint, and then just making them as simple as possible. Because did your customers have access to the actual stories to write? Like they could change the words and everything inside of them?
Right. Every driver has been cards.
Yeah. Okay. Huh. Yeah. Keeping that as simple as possible too, because then you're just leaving room for interpretation and just scope creep inside of those, and then you're spending tons of time ripping it down. Yeah, it takes forever. You guys went with Zach Olson, I think, a time or two ago, and he did something cool at Columbia where he did with some data. He found that they were spending all their money and time, a lot of their time and resources for web development on their homepage, but he found data that most of their entry points were directly to the product page from Google. So like no one goes to the Columbia.com and then searches for a coat. They go to Google, search for the coat, and go right to it. And so I thought that was a cool example of not necessarily simplifying, but directing the resources in the right way, because whatever they're doing on the homepage wasn't really being used by the customers. It wasn't really being visited very often. Okay, any last tips or things you guys want that ring true about simplification?